On today's episode, we'll be exploring unsolved mysteries that range from the unknown origins of a mysterious group of seafaring warriors, to the suspicious disappearance of 3 women in Springfield, Missouri, to a creepy, terrifying telephone message that can only be accessed by dialing a strange number from a public phone box. We will explore these mysteries and many, many more. So without further ado, grab a drink. My choice today is honey and lemon tea, and join me as we explore the unsolved mystery Iceberg. So to start off with, we have the case of Rachel Cooke. In 2002, on January 10th, 19-year-old Rachel Cooke went missing from just nearby her home in Georgetown, Texas. She had just gone out for a jog and was last seen walking back to her home, a mere 200 yards away. This case, 20 years later, is still cold, and detectives have no concrete theories on who took her or why. The police often get calls and tips regarding the case, especially on the anniversary of Rachel's disappearance, and the police have said that breaks in the case will likely only be made with tips and help from the public, as they apparently have nothing else to go on. As of today, Rachel is still a missing person, and her disappearance has yet to be solved. Rey Rivera was the very strange case of a 32-year-old finance writer who went missing in 2006, Maryland. He went missing from his home on May 16th, and after finding his car in a parking garage near his work, the searchers went to the top of the parking garage and looked out over the streets and buildings down below. One of the searchers saw what looked to be a hole in the roof of the Belvedere Hotel just below. So they went to check out the hotel, and they found Ray's body directly beneath the hole in the roof, now lying there in the conference room, dead and partly decomposed. This was a very strange set of circumstances. The gap between the parking garage and the roof of the Belvedere Hotel was quite substantial, though not impossible to cross. They estimated that Ray would have had to have been traveling at around 10 miles an hour, which is roughly sprinting speed for someone in trainers, but Ray was wearing flip-flops at the time, which I don't know if you've ever tried to run in flip-flops, but it is not an easy thing to do. The death was later ruled a probable suicide, so the police are no longer investigating it, but forensic expert Miriam Moya recently developed some new theories published in her book, Rey Rivera, Suicide or Homicide. These apparently completely rule out the theory of suicide, but whether these will convince investigators to reopen the case or not is anyone's guess. The Roanoke Colony. So we covered this one for the most part while covering the Dare Stones in another episode. The Roanoke Colony was the first attempted permanent English settlement in North America, founded in 1585. There was a bit of back and forth with the colony over the years, and at the time, the governor of the colony, John White, returned to England to collect supplies for the colony, as they were running low and relations with the natives weren't going too well. When John White came back to the settlement 2 years later, however, the colony was nowhere to be seen. The settlement was still standing. Nothing seemed to be burnt down or destroyed, but there was simply no sign of the colony, not in the nearby lands, waters, or islands. As I said, we have covered this one before, but there were these stones found etched with text, and these texts apparently told the story of what happened to the lost colony. Some of the major events involved the deaths of John White's daughter and granddaughter, and of the assimilation of the colony into a local native tribe. But the legitimacy of these stones, except for the first stone that was found, have been questioned over the years. So this all really depends on whether you believe the stones as legitimate, or whether you think they are a hoax. But you decide. Robert Springfield, known by his friends and families as Bugsy, was a 48-year-old man who went missing in the Bighorn Mountains in Montana in 2004. He was a military man, a mechanic, a firefighter, a real guy's guy, and he was out hunting with his 2 sons in Black Canyon, Montana. It was a fairly typical chilly September day, and after hunting for hours, his 2 sons were waiting at the pre-arranged spot that they had all agreed to meet at, and they were there, but their father was not. They waited all day until it got dark for their father there, and when he didn't show up, they contacted the Bighorn County Sheriff's Office. He was wearing heavy winter clothes and was armed with a bow and arrow on the day that he disappeared. A search was started with helicopters, sniffer dogs, horseback searches, but nothing was found. No bones, no blood, no body, no gear or equipment, until a year later. In October 2005, a hunter was hunting in the area when he heard the loud screeching of a crow. This crow was annoyingly loud and just wouldn't stop cawing. Caw, 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 caw. So the hunter followed the screeching and found the crow sitting in a tree. And below the tree, he found human remains. There was a partial skull, a femur bone, a neatly rolled up man's belt, and a pair of boots. There was also a man's coat with a tear in the back of it, and a wallet that importantly contained money. This was all that was found. No other body parts, no gear or equipment. And because of how strange this scene was, the sheriff's office actually suspected foul play, and so the FBI was brought in. The remains were confirmed to be Bugsy's, but this raised maybe more questions than it answered. Where was Bugsy's bow and arrow? Why didn't his wallet seem to be weathered at all if it had been sitting out here for over a year? What exactly happened to Bugsy? And where were the rest of his remains and gear? And Bugsy's wife said that if he were up there the entire time, that they would have found him in the initial search of the area. It is thought by some that Bugsy had perhaps been murdered, with his body being taken away somewhere and then brought back and set up in this scene. But again, his wallet still had money in it. So you'd think that if someone robbed and or killed him, they would have taken at least the money out of his wallet, if not the entire thing. But to this day, the truth about what happened to Bugsy out there is, at least for now, a complete mystery. Just a quick word from our sponsor, guys, who is me. If you are enjoying this video and would like to see more of them, do hit the subscribe button and notification bell, as it is the best way I know for you to be alerted when I release a new video. I do weekly videos here exploring many things, from murders and disappearances, ancient artifacts, to historical, scientific, and space mysteries. So if that sounds like your cup of tea, do hit the subscribe button and the notification bell, and poke the like button if you are feeling a little pokey today, and let me know what you are drinking in the comments below. But for now, let's get back to the video. Robot Wars, the Third Wars Accident. So Robot Wars was, for those who haven't seen it, an incredible TV series that aired on the BBC between 1998 and 2004, with 3 more seasons being made in 2016. It was, as the name suggests, a war involving robots. There was an arena, robots that people had made and brought in and could remote control. There were fire pits, spikes, blades, sparks, explosions. It was just awesome. There were also these giant housebots, as they were called, that would come into play at a certain time limit, or if the players got too close, and would just relentlessly attack the players' robots, destroying a good chunk of them. Very entertaining stuff. So the 3rd season of Robot Wars was one of the most successful seasons of the show, but it wasn't without its flaws. A large number of the participants were unhappy with their experience behind the scenes. There were apparently, at the same time, incredibly important health and safety standards that they didn't enforce, while also enforcing a ton of tiny, nitpicky safety standards that didn't really make anyone any safer, but just annoyed a lot of the contestants. The leader of one of the teams said there were hundreds of rules that he opposed, most of them stupid and written by some twerp who sits behind a desk and has never got their hands dirty and made anything, let alone a sophisticated machine like a robot. He said that all of these serious incidents and accidents would occur from a lack of proper safety regulations, like checking important failsafe devices that must be fitted on all robots and checked properly by an expert who understands the robots. And lo and behold, after this statement was made and ignored, a serious accident occurred almost immediately afterwards. There was a safety key switch that all robots were required to have to make sure they didn't turn on at inappropriate times, but these often weren't checked for quality. And so there was this one robot called Millie and Bug that used a fairly cheap safety key switch, and so it didn't do its job properly, resulting in the robot actually turning on as it was being carried out to the arena. Someone got spiked by the robot's weapon and had to be hospitalized. There was also an incident in season 1 where the host at the time, Jeremy Clarkson, almost died when a spinning blade detached from a robot in the arena and flew towards Clarkson at over 200 miles an hour, narrowly missing him and embedding into the concrete concrete wall behind him. Scary stuff. Thankfully, from what I've read, the safety standards seem to have improved over the years, but it is kind of mystifying as to why it was so stunningly bad during the Season 3 wars. Rodney Marks. Now, this one is kind of strange. Rodney Marks was an astrophysicist who died from methanol poisoning while working in Antarctica in the year 2000. He started to feel ill while walking from a remote observatory back to the main base, and just felt progressively more ill over the next 36 hours. Rodney sadly died the next day at just 32 years old from, and I quote, an undiagnosed condition. The media dubbed this the first South Pole murder, as suicide was actually considered to be the least likely cause of Rodney's death. A post-mortem had determined that he had died from methanol poisoning, and it was thought that Rodney purposefully ingesting this methanol was extremely unlikely. But despite these suspicions, that's basically where the investigation ended, as there wasn't really much evidence to go off, and there weren't really many witnesses down this far in the Antarctic. Rodney's father has said, I don't think we're going to try and find out anymore in regards to how Rodney died. I'd see that as a fruitless exercise, which is sad, but it was a strange case with very little evidence, so the likelihood of actually finding and convicting the culprit, if there even was one, is sadly extremely unlikely. Rosalind Ballingall was a 20-year-old student who suddenly vanished in 1969 South Africa. She was 6 feet tall, with long red blonde hair and piercing blue-green eyes. She was, as a friend put it, an amazing woman of extreme beauty. She apparently got high quite often and belonged to a group of hippies called the Cosmic Butterflies, which is such a hippie name. This group was apparently well known for engaging in group sex, drug, and spiritual activities. She loved the hippie lifestyle and unfortunately suffered from depression. So this time, when some of her acquaintances noticed her feeling down, they invited her to come with them on a forest retreat to clear her mind. This retreat was in the Neisner forests. Vast, dense, stunningly beautiful, the perfect place for a retreat. So she went along and was apparently quite enjoying her time in the cottage of this forest retreat. The group had some lunch, discussed some verses from the Bible, and prepared for a trip later on that evening. The group had their trip, and the next day Rosalind left the cottage at around 9 in the morning with just the clothes on her back and a Bible, telling friends that she was going out for a walk. She was seen by 2 staff members of the retreat, who Rosalind asked for directions to the nearest church, and then by a gardener who saw Rosalind walk across the lawn into a grove of trees and disappear into the forest. Rosalind was gone all day, and then as it started to get dark, as it normally does at night, her friends started to get worried. They waited all night for her return, and the next morning, when she still hadn't returned, they called the police and reported her missing. When asked why they didn't immediately call the police that night, they said that they thought it was pointless to call the police in the middle of the night, which doesn't really make sense. But valuable time had now been lost, and there was a steady rainfall slowly washing away any useful tracks or scents. When police arrived, they found Sasha, one of Rosalind's friends, sitting at the back door of the cottage playing a flute to try and lead Rosalind back home. Hippies. The authorities and locals, of course, started a search, but had trouble making sense of and navigating the vast, complex, dense forest, and sadly Rosalind was never found. The many theories say that Rosalind either got lost or injured or fell victim to foul play, either by strangers on the national road near the forest or by her acquaintances in the cottage, or that she had walked to the national road, which was around 4 miles away, and just ran away. She was later declared legally dead, and the mystery of what happened to Rosalind on that fateful day has never been solved. The Route 91 Bandit was this guy, a serial bank robber who targeted at least 11 banks in New England over a 5-month period starting in 2021. The banks were all located along Interstate 91, and the Bandit, as they called him, is described as a white male between 5'6" and 5'8", with blue eyes, light-colored hair, and a medium build. His MO was to walk up to the bank teller, hand them a note, then threaten to use his firearm on anyone who tried to stop him. He then demanded demanded cash before quickly making his way out of the bank, into his car, and disappearing. The FBI has offered a $10,000 reward for information leading to the bandit's arrest. And he is thought to be armed and dangerous, so maybe don't walk up to the guy if you happen to spot him. Rutger Hale was the very strange case of a man who died while driving along State Highway 6 in New Zealand 2013. He was only 22 years old at the time, and while driving with his girlfriend, he was struck in the head by an object that came in through his front windshield, hit him in the head, and then exited the rear of the vehicle. The object that killed Rutger was never found, nor was it identified in any searches, residual analysis, or video or in-person evidence. Rutger's girlfriend Danielle said that she recalls a white truck or utility vehicle coming towards them, and noticed a beige-colored object about the size of a tissue box or a brick rocketing towards them. Tire marks did show that a vehicle slowed down, made a U-turn, and then left the scene, which may very well have been this white vehicle stopping at the scene after realizing what had happened and picking up the item along with all of the evidence and taking it with them. A pretty tragic and mysterious one all round, but the mystery of what killed Rutger Hale is still unsolved and no one has been charged for his death. Saladin was a legendary sultan in the 12th century AD. His death and its cause have puzzled historians over the years, and no one has yet really come up with a satisfying answer for the cause of his death, at least not one that's universally accepted. Saladin was 56 years old and suddenly came down with a series of sweating attacks, headaches, and fever. He was weak, restless, had lost his appetite, and so doctors gave him bleedings and enemas, trying to cleanse his body of whatever was affecting him. But nothing they did seemed to help him, and eventually he couldn't even sip water, and soon after that he slipped into a coma. He did not improve, and later on, 14 days after his symptoms begun, Saladin died. There are obviously no tests or DNA evidence that we can use to try and figure out what he was suffering from. We can only use limited historical accounts. It has been thought that Saladin may have developed viral encephalitis, tuberculosis, typhus, or typhoid, but as of today, narrowing his cause of death down to just one disease or infection seems quite unlikely. Saturn's hexagon. So Saturn and Jupiter are the two gas giants in our solar system. And while Jupiter's giant red spot is fascinating, it's not incredibly mind-boggling, as it is understood for the most part to be a giant storm that is roughly 1.3 times the size of the Earth, which that's a big storm. But at the North Pole of Saturn is this. For some reason, unbeknownst to even NASA, the storms around Saturn's North Pole form a hexagonal shape, which is incredibly strange and unusual when you consider that most things in nature would tend to be circular, if anything, like storms, planets, and whirlpools, except for beehives, I guess. But space bees is an explanation that I just can't accept, on account of just how absolutely terrifying that would be. Scientists Rakesh Yadav and Jeremy Bloxham believe that there are vortexes that occur at the north pole of the planet. These vortexes are apparently caused by atmospheric flows deep within Saturn, and in turn pinch the sides of the storms, forming this hexagonal shape. It's incredibly hard to observe anything in or on Saturn, as the sunlight doesn't really penetrate through the thick clouds and storms in the atmosphere, so we're unable to see what exactly is causing the shape. They have done some research and experiments down here on Earth regarding something called turbulent compressible convection, and through these experiments they were able to create a 9-sided shape, not a 6-sided one, but something like this is still thought very likely to be the cause of the hexagonal patterns that we see on Saturn's North Pole, or, you know, aliens. Now, this is a really fun one. I don't know if it was that fun for the people involved, but let's get into it. The Sea Peoples were a hypothesized seafaring confederation that attacked ancient Egypt and other areas in the Mediterranean at around 1200 to 900 BC. Where these people came from, we don't know. Whether they were disparate groups of people or just one large confederacy, we don't know, and there have been a few different places suggested as their origin, from Western Anatolia to Aegean, to the Mediterranean islands, to Southern Europe. They could have come from any one of these, or all of them, or even from some places that no one has thought of. They are thought to have sailed all around the Eastern Mediterranean, and raided Anatolia, Syria, Phoenicia, Canaan, Cyprus, Egypt, all towards the end of the Bronze Age. And people were generally terrified of these mysterious, vicious fighters. This scene from Medinet Habu is often seen now as an Egyptian battle against the Sea People, as a lot of their hairstyles, weapons, and accessories match up fairly well with other separate accounts of them. I think what really intrigues me about this one is the mystery behind them. They seem to be pretty good fighters and sailors, but no one really knew who they were or where they came from. There were theories suggesting that they were originally European tribes, or that they were raiders or soldiers, pirates, or even migrants fleeing their country due to massive natural disasters. An inscription by Ramses II reads, "The unruly Sheridan, whom no one had ever known how to combat. They came boldly sailing in their warships from the midst of the sea, none being able to withstand them, and they never really settled anywhere or established a nation of any kind. So where they went is in some ways just as mysterious as where they came from." This one goes very, very deep and historical, and there are a ton of theories and stuff about exactly who they were and where they came from. So if you are interested in this one, I would highly recommend checking it out. The Shotgun Man was an unidentified man who killed many people in 1910's Chicago. He targeted mainly Italian immigrants, at one point killing 15 within a 15-month time span, all on Death Corner, an area in a notoriously violent Italian neighborhood. There were Italian gangs, the mafia, killings, muggings, just all sorts going on. And at the time, there were many witnesses for many of the killings. But the police were never able to identify the man, as apparently everyone was completely terrified of the gangs and what they would do. It has been suggested that perhaps he and the killings were actually made up, but whether he actually existed or whether he was just a boogeyman in order to scare the neighborhood and to keep people in line, we will likely never know. The Silent Man is this guy. He lives in Swansea, Wales, and his job or passion or calling or life purpose, as some would say, is to stand in the way of traffic and block the roads in his local area. Fascinating. As his name suggests, he doesn't react, he doesn't speak, he just stands there in the middle of the road. And he's been doing it for 7 years. 51-year-old David Hampson, as he is known to the law, was sentenced to 3 years back in 2017 for blocking the roads. And after serving his time, he got out and went back to the exact spot and blocked the road some more. He has been arrested and sent to jail 9 times, and each time has refused to explain himself or to explain why he does what he does. He apparently can speak but chooses not to, and has been described as not a polite man, which is a nice way of saying he's a complete dick. But what is going on in this goober's head, we may never know. The Sleepy Hollow Killer is an unidentified serial rapist and killer, responsible for assaulting at least 13 women in South Africa between the 1990s and 2007. He normally attacked sex workers, and his MO was to assault them and then strangle them to death with their own underwear. Pretty gruesome stuff. The only real suspect police had was a 32-year-old man who was arrested for allegedly murdering a 30-year-old woman nearby. When questioned about the case, the superintendent said that he didn't think the two cases were connected. So honestly, your guess is probably as good as theirs. The Springfield Three. On June 7th, 1992, 3 women, Suzanne Streeter, her friend Stacy McCall, and her mum Cheryl Levitt, all went missing from the Streeter family home in somewhat strange circumstances. Suzanne, 19, and Stacy, 18, had been out for graduation celebrations, and they were last seen leaving a graduation party at around 2 a.m. that morning. They decided to spend the night at Suzanne's home, as the original house that they planned to stay at was, they thought, too crowded. They likely made it home that morning, as their vehicles, clothing, jewelry, and purses were all found in the house. The following day, day at around 9 a.m., one of their friends, Kirby, and Kirby's boyfriend arrived at the Streeters' home as they had all planned to go to a water park later that morning. When they arrived, they noticed the front door to the home was unlocked, and after entering the home, they found no trace of the three women. The glass lampshade for the porch light was smashed, but the bulb was still intact, and while waiting, Kirby's boyfriend decided to be helpful and swept up all of the glass, which police later said might have actually destroyed some essential evidence. The pair waited inside the house with the family dog Cinnamon, who seemed to be quite agitated, and Kirby then received these strange phone calls from a restricted number, making sexual innuendos and implications. She hung up on these calls and just considered them as prank calls. They noticed that all three women's purses were on the floor of the living room, and there were neatly folded clothes from the night before. So it really seemed like the two girls had actually made it home and had been awoken sometime in the middle of the night and forced to suddenly leave the home to where? Stacy's mum, although she may have it going on, couldn't get a hold of her daughter, and after going to the house and seeing Stacy's two friends there, saying that the three women were missing, she went into the home and immediately called the police on the family landline. On this telephone's answering machine was apparently a strange message that was left, but this message was somehow, strangely, inadvertently deleted from the tape. Police were, as you can imagine, very interested in the call and the message, and believed it may have contained some clue as to the women's whereabouts. But obviously it had been deleted and they had no way of recovering it. After the police arrived, they obviously cordoned off the house, but later said that the crime scene had likely been corrupted by the 10 to 20 people that had arrived before the police. There was no sign of a struggle or forced entry, except for maybe the smashed porch light, and the girls had likely arrived home, slept in their beds, and then been taken or left sometime in the middle of the night. Some of the suspects for this case include Suzanne's ex-boyfriend, Dustin Reckler, who Suzanne had testified against for a burglary he committed months earlier. So it is thought that maybe he attacked Suzanne as revenge, or as a way of removing her future testimony, and that Suzanne's friend and mum were just in the wrong place, wrong time. Another suspect was Robert Craig Cox, who was at the time imprisoned in Texas for kidnapping and robbery. He told journalists that he knew that the three women were murdered and buried, and that their bodies would never be recovered. He was living nearby at the time of the disappearances, and when he was questioned at the time, he said that he was in church that morning, which his girlfriend confirmed. She later, however, recanted that statement and said that Robert had told her to say it. As you may have noticed in a few of these cases, this often seems like a plot by the convict, for them just to gain perks in prison, some time to walk around outside, or even notoriety. So I think we should always take these confessions with a pinch of salt. Robert said he would disclose all of the information as soon as his mum died, which could just be a way of avoiding shame from his mum, or it could just be an excuse in order to not confirm any details with the police. But either way, the case of what happened to these three Springfield women remains unsolved. Susie's dying is the eerie, true tale of a phone number in England in the 1970s and 80s that you could call from a public telephone box and hear a weird, creepy message. The number wasn't a regular telephone number. It apparently consisted of loads of zeros, ones, twos, and threes. But when you dialed it, you were connected to a woman who would speak in a monotonous voice, repeatedly saying one phrase over and over and over. Help me. Help me. Susie's dying. There is a full post explaining the potential backstory and account of this tale, and it's some pretty eerie stuff. I damn near scared myself half to death reading it at night, but I'll leave a link to it in the description below, so you can check it out for yourself. Just don't scare yourself too badly. The Tamil bell is a broken bronze bell discovered in 1836 New Zealand. This bell was actually being used by a Maori woman to boil potatoes, and when William Colenso saw this, he was stunned and took the artifact to be examined. The inscription along the bottom of the bell is in Old Tamil and translates to the ship bell of Mohieden Bucks. This bell is old, like 500 years old, and is what is sometimes called an out-of-place artifact. This is an artifact that is so out of place, either in time, space, or both, that it calls into question and challenges what we thought we knew about history or a certain peoples. The presence of the Bell has suggested at a possible Tamil or Indian discovery of New Zealand, or it's possible that the Indians could have traded with, say, a Portuguese sailor, who traded with others, who traded with others, who traded with others, who may have in turn reached New Zealand. So it is not proof that the Indians discovered and made contact with New Zealand that early on in their history, but it is interesting nonetheless. And I don't think there is a nobler way to cook potatoes. They are God's vegetable. The technological singularity is an interesting existential entry almost. In a hypothetical future, the single point in time at which technological growth tips over the edge and becomes uncontrollable and irreversible is the technological singularity. This was first coined by Hungarian-American mathematician John von Neumann, and it suggests that we will get to a point, possibly with AI, where a cycle will start, kind of like self-learning AI today, only more extreme. The technology will teach itself to be more intelligent, and then utilize this intelligence to make itself even more intelligent. And this loop happens over and over and over again, millions of times a second, until suddenly you have all-powerful, all-intelligent super beings, or super machines, or robots, or whatever you're calling them at the time. They will, in an instant, far outshine humans in intelligence and performance, and that essentially will be the end of humanity. One author, Werner Vinge, suggested in 1993 that if it occurred before 2005 or after 2030, he would be extremely surprised. And honestly, given 7 more years of this AI progression, he may very well be right. And just like the singularity of a black hole, we are cruising along next to the border of this black hole of intelligence. But once we cross that threshold, there is no stopping the trajectory. We will be destined to converge on that singularity, and that is terrifying. I really hope you enjoyed this week's episode, guys, and as always, thanks for watching.